Yes, we are back. Finally, post-Hurricane Irma, Beyond Reason Radio is back here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. We are on till 8 to 10 p.m. tonight. So we haven't done a show in a little while because, that big thing that was hanging out over our state that just would not go away. That was Hurricane Irma. Obviously, if you listen to this station here in Orlando, you were listening to me, Bud, Deb, and Mark Logus do coverage. We did 36 hours straight of hurricane coverage. And I did an 8-hour shift, first time I've ever done that. So now when I do my 2-hour show here, it's not going to seem as long, I don't think. I think I'm going to be able to do it from now on. I'm just saying. So this is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We have a lot to get to in the show today. We are going to start talking about the hurricane. I know a lot of you are still without power. I have some comments on that, and frankly, a lot of you aren't going to like it. But hey, that's the nature of things here. And then we have producing today, Mr. Tom Benson. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing fine. It seems like it's been ages since we've been doing this.
I know. It's only been like a week, but man, the longest week in the world.
I like the fact that this coming weekend is slowly but surely getting here because we all worked over the last weekend, and a lot of people were fried a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. And then, of course, a lot of people, after they worked, they had to clean out their yards and clean up their houses, and they were still out of power, and it was hot. Yeah. And I totally get it. Now, did you ever lose power, Tom?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Oh, how long were you out?
Not very long, less than 12 hours.
Oh, okay. So that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just got power back yesterday afternoon. So luckily I was able to stay at my parents' house because they never lost power. They didn't have internet. I think they still don't have internet, but they had power, thank God.
Well, I lost my internet after the storm was over, and it was down 3 days. Just came back today.
Oh, it just came back. Maybe my parents got it back too.
Yeah.
So thinking about the hurricane, and I'm glad, Tom Benson and I were here. I went downstairs next to the window and watched the worst of it, and I was here during Charlie, when Hurricane Charlie hit. Mm-hmm. I was out on my front porch watching that as well. Mm-hmm. In terms of Orlando, Charlie was much worse wind-wise. It didn't last quite as long because Charlie kind of barreled through here real quickly.
Sure.
But Charlie was much, much worse wind-wise. Wind damage and everything. I remember watching both. I mean, this one was no joke. The biggest reason why this one was no joke is it stuck around forever. It didn't want to seem to go away.
I used the barometer of blue tarps. When Charlie,
the blue tarp barometer.
Yeah.
I like that.
So
okay.
when Charlie went through, there were blue tarps everywhere on roofs. I have yet to see one from Irma. I'm sure they're out there. I just haven't seen them.
Yeah, there's not as many. I mean, this one was closer to like Francis. Francis came around after Charlie. Mm-hmm. It wasn't as strong, but it stuck around for a while. And, you had some wind damage and power outages. But I want to talk a little bit about some perspective when these hurricanes hit, because there's two ways I've noticed that you can react to situations like this. And I've seen both of them. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of people react the bad way. But there's two ways you can react to a situation like this. One, you can complain. You can complain about not having power. You complain about the weather. You complain about the world. Why is this happening to me, kind of thing. And just constant whining and complaining. Then the other way you can react, which is I try to react this way. Trust me, there was some complaining on my part because I did an 8-hour shift here, straight on the air. Mm-hmm. And that was, in the morning I was here at 6 a.m. and we did a 4-hour show as well. I was able to get a little bit of a nap in between that. And I was going to leave after that shift, but I had to wait. So the shift ended at 1 a.m. That was like the worst part of the storm. So I had to wait till the worst part of the storm was over. Then I was going to go to the hotel down the street. I couldn't go anywhere. The trees were blocking the roads. The parking lot was flooded. It seemed a little too dangerous to walk. So I was stuck here. Mm-hmm. All my clothes and everything were at the hotel and everything. I was stuck here. So I had to I tried sleeping on the floor at first. That didn't work. So luckily my boss had like a little futon thing. Let me sleep. But it was hard to sleep because people were making noises.
Sure.
So, I mean, trust me, I complained a little bit. I understand all that. Yeah. But, it was something else. But the thing is, this kind of makes me feel more grateful for the things that we take for granted every day when I go through situations like this. Because it kind of gives you perspective. We are so blessed in terms of like power, for instance. It's just there. It's just always there. Air conditioning is always there. Light is always there. Refrigerated food, it's just there. Even for like the poorest among us, those things are just there. And, you know, McDonald's is just there. Grocery stores, gas is just there every day.
Sure.
And we kind of just expect it to be there.
Right. I mean, you don't call the power company and say, great job, the power's on today. Really enjoy it. You know,
that's a good point. Or the gas or any of these places. Yeah. And we just expect it to always be there.
Yeah.
But then when a storm like this hits and it knocks a lot of these things out of whack, it makes me think, you know, a lot of those stuff that we take for granted every day, it really is a blessing. Because in the big scheme of things, especially when you look at the history of the world is not this. You know, most people didn't have electricity 100 years ago. They just didn't. It's in terms of the history of human civilization, it's a relatively new phenomenon. Indoor plumbing is actually a relatively new phenomenon when you think about it. But in the big scheme of things, none of this is guaranteed. None of what we take for granted every day is guaranteed. It takes a civil society to put it in place. It takes people working in the businesses to do it. It takes a system in place. It takes energy workers making sure everything works. And all of this stuff coming together for a society to work, for all of these things that we take for granted every day to happen. It's not guaranteed. And so it makes me kind of step back. And one, it makes me realize, you know, how fragile things can be sometimes. And we have to take that into consideration and make sure we're prepared for the worst times. But it just it honestly makes me feel grateful for what we do have, that we are so blessed, because it's not guaranteed at all. So when I'm thinking about the hurricane and how the hurricane has hit us, I've seen it bring out the best in people in a lot of ways and the worst in people in a lot of ways. And that's just an inevitable thing, I guess. And Harvey was kind of the same situation. I'll start with the best in people. In terms of the hurricane, for one, I worked here, and a lot of people were in this station working hard, nonstop, to get the information out to people. In the past few days, our stations here have been handing out ice. I've known many people who have helped their neighbor, helped their friends, helped their family who didn't have power. Come over here, take a shower. Come over here, stay here.
Sure.
Come over here, do that. YMCA today allowed people who didn't have power, who were not members, to come and take showers, get a cold glass of water, you know, cool off in the air conditioning. I know the mall was open and they were allowing people to charge their cell phones and come out. This is the best of us. And I know, you know, I see a lot of the neighbors and I see them cleaning up their yards immediately. And I know kids help to their parents and help their neighbors, and neighbor help neighbor to clean up their yards. And then I see a lot of the energy people working nonstop, working for all these power companies nonstop. People coming from out of state, coming in. That's sort of the best of us.
They came from as far as Canada.
Yeah, that's exactly right. My sister was driving on the road. She actually evacuated with my mom because my mom doesn't do well without power, but she came back yesterday and she took video on the 417 and just power truck after power truck after power truck after power truck started coming by. It's just an amazing feat. That's the best of us. But I know it also has brought out the worst of us in so many situations. I was talking with someone before it hit who worked at Safeway and people were trying to get water. And she said there were fights, people were nasty, and all this stuff trying to get bottles of water. And I'm thinking, no, that's not what it's supposed to be. We need to help each other in these situations, not fight with each other. But then, of course, she said, you know, I'm like, you know, if you can't get bottles of water, a lot of people couldn't get it. Fill up your tap water with pitchers. We talked about that. Fill up cups, fill up your tap water, fill up your bathtub. And she says, oh, I'll never drink tap water again. And I'm thinking, what? You know, oh, I can't stand tap water. And I'm thinking, this is an emergency.
If you're thirsty enough, you'll drink it.
If you're thirsty, you prepare and drink tap water. But it's that whole entitlement mentality. Well, I want bottled water because I can't drink. And I'm like, really? I don't understand this. And so in the past few days, I've been going on social media, and I have been seeing people, and I understand people are upset because it's freaking hot in Florida, okay? I get it. After Charlie, my family was out of power for 2 weeks. 2 weeks we were out of power. That's a long time. I started suffering from heat exhaustion and near the end of that, and my mom was worried about me and had to take me to another place. But, I'm seeing people on social media constantly complain about not having power, which is fine. I get complaining, but they're bashing the energy companies. They're bashing Duke Energy or whatever it is, saying it's their fault. Oh, they're puke energy, and calling them all these names. And I'm thinking, really? This, in my opinion, they have done an incredible job. Most of these energy companies have done an incredible job, in my opinion. I don't know what people expect. It's not just flipping a switch and it just turns back on, especially if there's a tree over a down power line. It has to be fixed.
Sure. And
people will say, well, they should have built it so this wouldn't happen. Okay, well, they could do that, but it's going to cost a lot of money.
That's right.
And then you're going to complain that your power bill went up.
Yeah, one of the things that usually comes up after a disaster like this is put all the utility wires in ground. Well, that costs a lot of money.
It costs a lot of money. I mean, they did that for my parents' area because we used to lose power all the time, not even just hurricanes, all the time. So they finally redid all that, put it underground, but it cost them a ton of money. Duke Energy, a ton of money to reinvest in all that. The problem with that as well is if it is more reliable, but when it does go out, it's much more difficult to get to, and it costs a lot more to fix. So those are things you have to think about. But I was just looking at the stats, and this is as of this morning, so this has actually changed. But the Orlando Sentinel had updated stats this morning, okay? And this is what they said. More than 2.2 million people, including about 318,000 customers in Central Florida, remained without power Thursday. That seems like a lot this morning. That accounts for about 14% of the state. That is down from 60%
I was just going to say
of the state.
That's half from what it was probably Tuesday morning.
So remember, this all started Monday. Yeah. And now we're at Thursday, less than a week. And we are from 60% of the state. That is an unimaginable number for a state as large as Florida, down to 14%. When I look at that, I can't complain. And then Duke Energy, they pointed out that Thursday at 6 p.m., actually, this looks like this might be up to date, but they were able to restore, let's see, I had some of the updated stats. It was something like 70% of people. They were able to restore power for 70% of their customers. So there's that aspect. I just don't understand. I understand that it's hot, and there are things you have to do in those situations to find better ways to take care of yourself. And I understand people want to complain, but this whole bashing of the energy companies, I don't get it. They provide us an amazing service most days of the year that we take for granted every day, and we just expect it to be there. And it's not. We're not entitled to any of this. It takes work. It takes an infrastructure. The other part that I want to get to that was the worst of us, and this baffled me. I could not understand. And you were here, Tom Benson. As Monday morning, people were calling into this station and texting, and I saw this on social media and everything else, complaining about the curfews. The storm had just barely left the state as of Monday morning, and people were like, why aren't they lifting the curfews? I want to go out. And people all over the roads, and we had Kim Montes from Florida Highway Patrol come on, and she said the vast majority of people on the roads shouldn't have been on the roads. They were just curious and going out on the roads.
Sure. And nothing was open anyway.
Nothing was open. The roads were covered in trees, and parts were flooded, and power lines were down, street lights were out. And yet I saw countless people complaining that there was a curfew. They could not. How could there be a curfew? They need to lift it now. I need to get this. And I'm like, it hasn't even been a day. It hasn't even been one day. And you were told ahead of time to prepare for at least a couple of days. You were told.
Probably the people who didn't prepare ahead of time. They needed something.
And you're all complaining that there's a curfew and just keep people safe. And there's these things blocking on the road. I couldn't understand that. I'm like, okay, calm down, everyone. Eventually, you're going to get your Chipotle. You're going to get your Frappuccinos eventually. You can get out there. So all of this. So the best of us is I saw a lot of good people working together. I saw a lot of businesses helping out. I know a lot of the fast food restaurants have been open, so they have been slammed. And that happened after Charlie. I worked for Checkers after Charlie. We were slammed. So the workers there are working very hard. Make sure to thank them for that. It brings out so much of the best of us. I've seen people give water. I've seen people help their friends, their families. But there is that worst part of us, and I just want to call on people to have a little bit of perspective here. That maybe take a second to use this as a time to say, man, we have so much to be grateful for in this society every day that most of the history of the world didn't have, and we're complaining after a couple days. Let's take a step back and be thankful for what we usually have. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. The next thing we have to get into a little bit is, of course, global warming was almost immediately blamed for this. So I have some interesting stats on hurricanes hitting Florida, which might surprise you. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I am your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
Yes, welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. We are back and ready to go. I'm your voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We're doing the show till 10 p.m. tonight. I am going to get into a bunch of other stuff. We have to talk about the debt. I have to talk about more Democrats are signing on for single-payer health care. We have to talk about Trump and this whole deal he's trying to make with the Democrats. And I have a great piece by Matt Walsh from The Blaze talking about how churches are not doing their job. We're going to get to that in the next hour. And, of course, I will end the show with things that made Yaffee laughy. So definitely a lot of stuff to get into. If you want to call, you can. 407-916-5400. Or you can text to 23680. So, I mean, this wasn't too much of a shock. But it didn't take too long for some on the left to make this about global warming. This Hurricane Irma, they did it with Harvey. You know, I saw an article, and I can't remember where I saw it. I think it was Washington Post. It could have been Politico. But before Hurricane Irma even hit, it was bashing Rick Scott for not taking global warming seriously. So this hurricane's about to hit, and they're like, well, you know, Rick Scott didn't take global warming seriously, and now it's about to punch him in the face. And, I mean, this is why global warming is such the perfect theory for them to use. Because you have strong hurricanes, that's global warming. You have less hurricanes, that's global warming. You have blizzards, that's global warming. You have droughts, that's global warming. You have floods, that's global warming. And the solution is always, always, always more government control, more government regulation in the economy, and bash businesses. It's always what it is. It's never, hey, you know what would help stop global warming? More free market capitalism. That would really help stop global warming. You hear that? Anybody ever hear that? I never hear that. That seems really convenient to me. So, but I mean, it started right away. They had that hand-in-hand telethon that played on a bunch of stations for hurricane relief for Harvey and Irma. And you had Stevie Wonder, who started it out. He was about to sing a song, and he did a little introduction. And he talks about how we just need to love, except those who don't believe in global warming. Here it is.
We've come together today to love on the people that have been devastated by the hurricanes. When love goes into action, it preferences no color of skin, no ethnicity, no religious beliefs, no sexual preferences, and no political persuasions. It just loves. As we should begin to love and value our planet And anyone who believes that there is no such thing as global warming must be blind or unintelligent.
So there you go. So we have to love everyone. Unless you don't believe in global warming, then you're blind and unintelligent. We don't love you, of course. But everyone else we love. But so there we go. Blaming global warming was obvious. I found an interesting article here. It just kind of lists some of the most devastating hurricanes that have ever hit Florida. So you think global warming really, heated up since 1990, I guess. Really now it would be the worst, right?
Oh, yeah.
No.
Year after year after year. Oh, wait a minute. It's been since 2004 since we had. Oh, excuse me.
Well, that's because of global warming too, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
But I mean, this starts, and it's really hard to even talk about a lot of this because they haven't been keeping records. For one, this many people haven't lived in Florida ever. But I mean, it's been since Disney World, which was in the 1970s, where really people started moving to Florida. So it's hard to even, they don't have records of all this past, earlier than the 1800s. And before the 1900s, the records aren't really very reliable. So, but looking at some of this, these storms go back to 1919, the worst hurricanes in Florida. So you had 1919 is where this starts. The Key West hurricane was what it was called. I guess global warming was a problem that year. It killed more than 800 people, but although they don't really know the exact total at the time. More than 500 were lost on 10 ships that either sunk or were reported missing. It was one of the most damaging storms ever to hit at that point, that hit Key West. Then we go up to 1926. A long time ago, 1926 storm was described by the U.S. Weather Bureau of Miami as probably the most destructive hurricane ever to strike the United States, up to that point. The death toll is estimated to be from 325 to perhaps as many as 800. Estimated gusts up to 150 miles per hour. Mm-hmm. Strong. Hit right in Fort Lauderdale. It's a strong hurricane. That was 1926. 1928. So we're still in the early 1900s before global warming. Palm Beach hurricane. 2,000 died that night.
Wow.
When the hurricane roared ashore at Palm Beach, September 16, 1928. It says mostly black sugar plantation workers. Mm-hmm. Almost 2,000 people perished. It said as many as additional 1,000 may have never been counted. 1926. We're still in, now we're going into the 30s. 1935, Ismadora hurricane hit Key Largo, killed 408 people, and wiped out the railroad to Key West. Then we go up to 1960. So they had a law until 1960. That was Hurricane Donna, which 150 mile per hour winds and more than $300 million in damage. And then you have 1964 Hurricane Cleo, 110 mile per hour winds hit Miami and Fort Lauderdale again. $125 million in damage. 68% of the customers were in the dark. I guarantee that it took a lot longer than a few days to get power back then. Hurricane Betsy hit the Upper Keys with 140 mile per hour winds, leaving 13 dead and 49% of customers without power. 1965. And then, of course, you have Hurricane Andrew. Winds more than 160 miles per hour. That's not all of them. There's many more hurricanes. There's been strong hurricanes forever. And this one, and what's really interesting about this one, is this one actually weakened a lot sooner than they expected it to. There was a great piece I was reading in Investors Business Daily that was talking about how they expected this to be one of the worst hurricanes ever. It was going to have $200 billion in damage, and then it hit the state and actually weakened a lot. Why did it weaken? You had a high pressure, you had dry air from a high pressure system that went into it and basically killed it from the inside and kept it over the state. He makes this point, which is what I find very interesting. So when it was going to be the most devastating storm ever, they blamed global warming, right? Mm-hmm. But could you possibly then blame global warming for it dying?
For weakening it?
For weakening it?
Sure. Of course not.
I don't hear them ever doing that.
No.
So maybe global warming, if we're going to go down this model of it changing the climate and everything, maybe there's a possibility that global warming actually weakened the storm and helped prevent us from getting more damage.
Oh, that's not the consensus of scientists out there.
I don't see them. Well, it doesn't fit the alarmist
Yes.
agenda. You can't have alarmism. You know, global warming might actually weaken hurricanes, maybe. I mean, I don't necessarily believe that, but you go down that road, who knows? There's so much we don't understand if global warming is happening. First, we don't understand if it's completely man-made. Second, we don't understand in terms of the history of the world. There have been much hotter times in the history of the world and much cooler times in the history of the world. But the third thing is if global warming would necessarily have all negative effects. It could have some positive effects, like weakening hurricanes. There have been some who have suggested, some who really believe in global warming alarmism, who have suggested that global warming would cause less hurricanes. The point is they don't know. They don't know. We don't know. Most of it is just timing, really. Most of it is cyclical. Bud was telling me on the morning show this morning that there was like 3 years where he was living in New Jersey, and he got hit by a hurricane every year in New Jersey.
Sure.
This is not new.
Yeah.
They're trying to convince us that this is new. It's not new. The only thing that's new is we're able to track them more. But, I mean, it's really 50 years old, so we need a little perspective on this. So there's something else I learned about learned from this hurricane. And it actually has to do with healthcare and single payer and socialism, really. How in the world am I going to connect Hurricane Irma with socialist healthcare and socialism in general? Well, I will do that next. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you heart Beyond Reason Radio, listen to the Beyond Reason Radio podcast on iHeartRadio. Just download the iHeartRadio app and search Beyond Reason Radio. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
So, as of this week, 16 Democratic senators had signed on to Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill, including many moderate members of the caucus and a number of possible 2020 presidential contenders. That includes the likes of Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and there are many others out there. Bernie Sanders had an op-ed in the New York Times this week going over why he believes that Medicare for all is what we need, basically socialized medicine. Now, I have been talking for a while this might be a bad idea for Democrats to really sign on to. Now, why is that? Because right now they're all promising it. But it's probably going to be a broken promise. Because the price tag is just, they're not going to be able to afford it. You had California that wanted to have this earlier, and they decided, no, we can't do it. It's just way too expensive. But you have a lot of people, Bernie Sanders and the like, trying to give out socialized medicine. Now, the other thing that makes this, to me anyway, a problem, and I'm going to go over some polls here. This is Beyond Reason Radio, by the way. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We are on until 10 p.m. tonight. We have a lot to get to, so make sure you catch the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. So when you're looking for a Medicare for All plan, you would think that means most of this country are not satisfied with their health care. That we need to scrap this whole system. We need a socialized medicine, because that's basically what Bernie Sanders wants. Now, he wants a Medicare for all, and that keeps some of the private system, but there's no doubt that would screw up everything. And he often touts how Canada's system is so great. Well, it's a nationalized healthcare system. So you would think that means there's a lot of people in this country who are not satisfied with their health care. According to Gallup, as of 2016, it was the latest poll I could find on this, 65% of Americans are satisfied with how the healthcare system works for them. 65% of Americans. And then you have a poll earlier this year, from Pew Research that says nearly 9 in 10, 87%, who have seen a healthcare provider in the past year say they are satisfied with their healthcare provider. Pretty much they said their symptoms or concerns were carefully listened to. 84% feel their doctor really cared about their health and well-being. 80% said they got the information they needed about their treatment or at-home care. So you have a majority of Americans who are satisfied with how the healthcare system works for them, and you have a vast majority of Americans who are satisfied with their doctor and how they treat them right now. That's a lot of people that you are going to upend and screw things up for if you go for a socialized healthcare system. This is something that the Democrats are not thinking about, I think. That they think this is going to be great, this is going to be popular, and its popularity has gone up a little bit. But once they go into this, there's going to be a lot of people who are saying, wait a minute. I'm satisfied with what my healthcare is doing for me right now. Why would I want to upend the whole system and go to a socialized medicine thing? Now, the best solution would be to find a way to lower costs, of course, because cost is really the biggest issue. When you talk to most people, they want to pay lower costs. And that includes insurance, but that also includes medicine, which, by the way, we always hear that Canada and all these other places pay less for prescriptions. I actually interviewed someone from the FDA on the Florida Roundtable. Mm-hmm. He said when you compare it to generics, because most people in the U.S. are on generic drugs, mm-hmm. that we actually pay less when you take into the account that we use generic drugs. So this whole idea that we're paying so much more than the rest of the world for our prescriptions, not necessarily true a lot of the time. So there you go. But I think so things that are going to get the Democrats in the way of getting socialized medicine is, one, the cost. Because you already have Medicare is already, before even Medicare for All has existed. Medicare for All doesn't even exist yet. And you already have Medicare costing a lot of money. Let's see here. The Bernie Sanders Medicare for All scheme would cost $13.8 trillion over the first decade. $13.8 trillion in a decade. That's going to be hard to get people to sign up on. But Medicare, even before that, already carries $58 trillion in unfunded liabilities. So you have $58 trillion in unfunded liabilities right now for Medicare, and we want to add a new plan to it that's $13.8 trillion to that price tag? I'm not sure that's going to work for a lot of people. Hey, politically, they're trying to do this, but I'm not sure.
Hey, Vern, how are we going to pay for this?
Well, I mean, the excuse is this, that they will make it, that once the government's in control of this, they will be able to cut costs and make it so much more efficient and better for everyone.
That's why the price of postage stamps keeps going down, huh?
Well, I don't know if postage stamps aren't the best example. They're not exactly that expensive, but you're right. Anytime the government gets involved in things, the price goes. Medicare right now is a great example. The cost for Medicare hasn't gone down over the years. It just goes up and up and up and up and up. Now we have $58 trillion in unfunded liabilities. So, but I want to get into a little bit of what I learned from this hurricane and what it can teach us about socialism and especially socialized medicine. Because the idea of the Bernie Sanders crowd and the Elizabeth Warren crowd and those who want socialized medicine is that, yes, it will cost the government a lot more money, but they'll be able to reduce costs overall because they'll make such a much more efficient system. And it'll just be better for everyone. And everyone will be covered, and they'll be able to get the health care they really need in emergencies. I'm going to tell you what that's really going to look like, and we're going to get to that in a little more detail. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
It would be beyond reason not to listen to Yaffee on your TuneIn Radio app. Download the app today and search Beyond Reason Radio. The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
So one thing you might not know about some of these socialist healthcare, socialist countries that have socialized medicine, something I didn't really realize until this week, that a lot of these countries that Bernie Sanders touts as a model for us, mm-hmm. the people in those countries actually have out-of-pocket out-of-pocket spending to cover costs of healthcare. People just assume it's free and that everything they get for their healthcare, they don't pay anything out of pocket. That's not true.
Uh-huh.
In fact, in the Netherlands, it's 12.2% is what the country pays out of pocket. Denmark, it's 13.7%. Switzerland, it's 27.7%. In the UK and Canada, it's 15%. Also, of course, many of the single-payer countries rely on private sector to one degree or another. In Canada, 15% of the health costs are paid by private insurers. In Germany, upper-income Germans can opt out of the government's sickness funds and buy private coverage. In fact, there are no OECD countries where the government picks up the entire healthcare tab. In Canada, government spending counts for 70% of healthcare costs. Germany, 85%. Sweden, 83.9%. UK, it's under 80%. Just some perspective on, which we think it's like a utopia over in Europe and some of these other countries with their nationalized healthcare, that you can just walk in, you don't have to pay anything, and you get all the healthcare you need when you need it. I think that's what people expect it's going to be here. If we have some kind of socialized medicine, they're just going to go. It'll just be like their doctor is now, and they'll just go and get their key, but they won't pay anything. No, that's not what's going to happen. But I wanted to talk about what I learned from the hurricane and how the hurricane taught me a little bit about socialism. So when the hurricane was coming, Tom Benson, what was one of the first things that everyone went for in the stores?
Bread and water.
Bread and water. Okay, so you had a huge increase in demand for water. Specifically, water was the big one. I noticed. Everyone wanted water. Sure. Some people wanted ice, but water. Everywhere was running out of water. So what happened when you had the increase in demand?
It went up in price in some places.
Well, no, actually it didn't, because that's against the law. Most places you couldn't do it, which is another point. But they ran out.
Oh, okay.
Basically, yes, they ran out of places. All these places, you had this massive increase. You had a crisis. So you have a crisis, then you have a massive increase in demand, and everybody goes and buys water immediately.
I see where you're going on this.
Exactly. Everyone goes buys water immediately. So what happens? They run out. So what happened next? Well, during a crisis like this, the government immediately puts down price controls. They put down price controls. They tell all these businesses, you cannot raise prices on any of these things because that's considered price gouging, and you can't do that in a crisis. So you can't raise prices. So you have a massive increase in demand all of a sudden. You have price controls. Then you have shortage of supplies. So what happened next? Well, believe it or not, most of these stores, and this is a fact, you can check it out, most of these stores started rationing. It's exactly what happened next. So when you would go into Publix or you would go into Safeway or whatever it was, they would limit how much you could get.
2 6-packs, one 24-pack, sure.
Yeah, one 24-pack of water. You got the limit is exactly what you could get. So you have increased demand all of a sudden. You have price controls, so you're not letting the marketplace work the way it should be. And then you have rationing. That is exactly what happens in socialism. Now, in this case, you at least have private businesses who have an incentive to still sell their product. So what they try to do is get enough trucks down here to keep up with the demand so they can make some money off of it. But they're not going to have as much of an incentive because you don't have prices are all screwed up. But I thought about this for an instance. I'm like, this is exactly what happened in socialism and socialized medicine. So if we immediately go to a nationalized healthcare plan, what would happen? You would have a massive increase in demand for all these healthcare services because they would assume it's free.
And there's fewer doctors, so...
Exactly. So you have fewer doctors. You have a massive increase in demand. What else comes with government healthcare? Price controls. So you have the doctors, the healthcare providers, they can't charge anything. They have price, the government would control the cost of all of these things. So you have government control of cost, You have massive increase in demand because healthcare is a crisis. You have a shortage of doctors. So what would happen after that? A shortage of supplies. You have a shortage of doctors you can go to. You have a shortage of healthcare supplies because they can't meet up with the all of a sudden increase in demand. And then you have the government price controls, cutting costs, which would create even more shortages because prices, the marketplace, is what allocates resources much better than price controls. So you have all these things. So what is that going to lead to next? It will immediately lead to rationing. So the government will have all this. They will have all this to worry about, all this increase in demand. They'll have a shortage of doctors. They'll have to try to control costs, which will have shortage of supplies. And then they're like, well, what can we do? How are we going to handle all this? We have to take care of all these people now because it's the government's job to do this. Well, what they're going to do is they're going to ration. They're going to limit the amount that you can get from your doctor, from your healthcare provider, from your prescription drugs, whatever it is. They're going to limit it. What they could do is they can either limit it or raise prices. But because the government's involved, they're going to try to control prices, so they're going to limit it. So you have rationing. This is why socialism, it was just such a great example of why socialism doesn't work. Because the marketplace will work things out. So in a marketplace, if you have an increase in demand, you can and you have a limited supply, what you do is you raise prices. But it also encourages those companies to find more efficient ways to sell their product because they still want to sell their product to as many people as possible because they want to make money. So they find more efficient ways to sell their product, to get their product out to as many people as possible. So they find ways to have the supply to meet the increase in demand because they have the incentive to make money. This is what happens when you don't have price controls. Once that happens, you have the increased supply to meet the increased demand. So what happens? Prices go down. So you have more supply of what more people want and more people making money, including the businesses, and more consumers being able to get exactly what they want at a lower price. That is a great example of how the marketplace works. But when you have other things, would you have increase in demand, shortage of supplies, and price controls, then you add rationing, and it creates all kinds of problems. That's Economics 101 for you right there on why socialized medicine or socialism in general is bad. And I learned that all from the hurricane. So there you go. Hurricane taught me something good. All right. The first hour is done. We have one more hour to go here on Beyond Reason Radio. I'm going to get into how the churches are failing us, a topic I talk about a lot. A great piece by Matt Walsh I want to get into. We'll get to that next, and stay with me.
To a conscience knowing so well that nothing comes from indifference.
Yes, welcome back to the show, everyone. Beyond Reason Radio is back, finally. I know during Hurricane Irma, one of the worst things about not having power, you didn't have power, you were out of school, you were out of work, and you were just like, man, I just wish I had Beyond Reason Radio right now. And they didn't get to have it. They didn't have it. And that, I mean, okay, yes, you're sweltering in the heat with the AC. Yes, places are crowded to get food. Yes, you have some wind damage, but you didn't have Beyond Reason Radio.
Now, there's a disaster for you, I'll tell you.
What is more beyond reason than that? Okay. I joke, I kid. But yeah, I appreciate you all listening. We are back, and we'll get back to our regular schedule next week as well. I definitely wanted to get a show in this week because there's, frankly, a lot to talk about. I mean, I haven't even gotten into the debt thing. I haven't gotten into Trump and what's going on with him and DACA and all this stuff.
Well, that's just it. During the hurricane, when we were doing the coverage and everything, I forgot about everything else going on in the world. You know?
It's amazing how that happens.
Sure.
And, in a way, that was one of the nice parts of the hurricane.
A little bit of a respite.
Yeah, a little bit of a respite from all the crazy politics out there. But you're right. It was so hard to get into a lot of that stuff and keep track of a lot of that stuff because, there was a massive hurricane going over the state that just wouldn't go away. So, but I will go ahead, Tom.
You had the best coin, the best phrase for that. No one picked up on it. That was Irmageddon.
Irmageddon.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I didn't come up with that, but somebody else did. But yeah, Irmageddon. I heard everything. I had there were some other good ones that I had as well dealing with Irma. One person said Irma getting out of here. One person said Irma Gerd. Is Irma God? So yeah, there was a bunch of stuff. Irma doomed. I don't know. There's a bunch of different ways you get it, but Irmageddon was, but it didn't end up being as bad as they thought. It was pretty bad for the Keys, though. Yeah. Obviously, yeah. It's a disaster. I definitely feel bad for the people down there. Although you should have evacuated. I mean, really, you should have left. That was not a place to stay. If you had the chance to evacuate, you just got to evacuate. You just have to. I know a lot of people don't want to. They think it's not going to be that bad, but if I were down there, I would have evacuated. And my brother, he goes on his anniversary with his wife to the Keys every year, and he's not sure he's going to be able to do it this year.
That's nice of him.
What?
He goes with his wife.
Oh, I guess I didn't have to clarify that. I guess that was already mentioned there. All right, so I want to get into something a little bit different this hour because there was a great piece that some other people have covered as well, but I think it's really good, and it's actually probably the most important thing I'm going to talk about on the show today, and one of those things that really is important for our society and doesn't get enough attention, frankly, in my opinion. And it's something that I have been talking about for a while. And part of it is I've been talking about how the culture, pop culture specifically, but a lot of American culture is frankly going away from Christianity and Christian values. There's no doubt about it. If you are a Bible-believing Christian and that is your faith, that is your core, and you go out into the everyday world, there is a contrast there now. It doesn't align with your beliefs in a lot of situations. And I've been talking about how, frankly, in my lifetime, Christians are going to be the minority in this country. They're going to be a big minority in this country. It's just a fact. They kind of already are now. Most people still say they're Christians, but there's going to be a point where we're going to be a more minority. It's not all bad because that will leave the good Christians and get rid of the lukewarm Christians, so to speak. But speaking of the problem with the culture, there's a piece here by Matt Walsh from The Blaze. It says this: "Dear churches, you're killing yourselves, and this is how." And I really liked this piece because I've seen this very thing, and it frustrates me to no end. I'll give an example of something I've seen at a church that I visited once, but I've seen this very thing he's talking about, and it's frustrating. He says this. He says, "A certain sermon I heard a little while ago has stuck with me." He says, "It began with a reference to Toy Story." Yes, Toy Story, the cartoon with talking toys. It says, "The Pixar film, as the pastor explained, contained many examples of friendship. Friendship is important, you see. It's good to have friends. In case anyone thought friendship was bad, he was standing up to boldly declare otherwise. Remember the Randy Newman song called 'You Got a Friend in Me' from the movie? He did. He quoted it at length. Then he handed out juice boxes and graham crackers, and we had nap time on the alphabet rug." Okay, I think he's being a little facetious on my last point. He says, "I have no problem with a sermon that draws on art or literature outside of Scripture to illustrate a theme contained in it. But all of the poems, novels, songs, films, paintings, sculptures that may reveal some divine truth, he went with Toy Story." "Oh, but Toy Story is relatable, you say? Really? Relatable to whom? Kindergartners?" "Well, are we in a kindergarten class or a church? It certainly is hard to tell anymore. Just add a few boxes of crayons and a couple glue sticks, and some of these churches would be indistinguishable. I think this is true in too many cases. Since, of course, the dissertation on the theological significance of Buzz Lightyear was pretty standard fare, the message preached from most pulpits in America is just like this. Superficial, childish, empty, and seemingly designed to insult the intelligence of anyone who hears it. Christianity is dull and lifeless in this country because that's what the church and its leaders have done to it. They've made it into something so bland, generic, and inoffensive that it no longer bears any resemblance to the faith of our Christian ancestors. Even the church buildings themselves reflect this trend. Most of them look like shopping malls or government buildings. Sleek, gray, ugly, secular. But inoffensive. Inoffensive in the same way that the DMV is inoffensive. It says, indeed, the primary goal of the modern church is to avoid offense at whatever cost. And this is precisely why they're dying. It says the problem is not merely that they're boring people. After all, there are those who are bored watching anything that doesn't involve explosion and car chases. The problem, more specifically, is that they're starving people. There is no substance, no meat in the message being preached. The congregants sit there and slowly starve to death. Your flocks are starving, churches. You are starving them. He continues on here. This is Matt Walsh from The Blaze. Great piece. It says, John 21 tells us of a conversation between our Lord and Peter. 3 times our Lord tells the apostle to tend or feed his sheep. You are not feeding us when you serve up a bunch of cliches, platitudes, and vapid pop culture references. The sheep need something real. We need to be guided. We need to be taught. We need to be empowered. We need to be called to repentance. Oh my gosh, not the word repentance. Can't call people to repentance anymore. You know why? Because they would have to admit they did something wrong. They would have to admit that they sinned. That's just my little ad to Matt Walsh here, but that's just something I've noticed. Repentance isn't as big of a deal anymore, even though it's one of the most important things in the Bible. It's constantly what Jesus called for, and John the Baptist called for, of course, and the apostles. He continues on here. We need to be told how to navigate the spiritual minefield of modern culture. We need something to hold on to, something to think about as we return to our daily lives. Something real, something true, something unsettling, something dangerous, something incredible, something religious. And this is where he makes a really good point. He says, we are getting killed out there. Don't you understand that? We drag our sorry, beaten carcasses into the church each Sunday. And fewer of us even bother to do that anymore. After another week languishing in Sodom. And what do you have to say? Friends are good? Really? Is that it? The Disney Channel could have told me that. What else do you have? Nothing? Could you really have nothing to say to us? Then what are you doing? Why do you exist? Tear down the buildings. Turn them into parking lots. At least they'll serve a purpose again. He continues on. He says, the troops are suffering massive defeats in battle. And when they consult their commanding officer, what do they hear? Yeah, it's rough out there, guys. So let me tell you what I learned about teamwork from watching Guardians of the Galaxy. I spoke to someone at an event recently, and he told me that the pastor at his Methodist church actually gave a sermon about lessons from Spider-Man. I guess he was trying to tap into the superhero craze, taking his preaching cues from Stan Lee instead of St. Paul. Millennials must love that. Well, this millennial didn't. He left mid-sermon and found a new church that very day. And he talks about this a lot in his piece. I don't want to read the whole thing. It's actually pretty long. But he says this at the end. He says, whoever does not want to be challenged, whoever insists that they are above reproach, whoever wants only sweet nothings whispered in their ear, whoever wants a comfortable Christianity, does not want Christianity at all. They are not limbs on the body of Christ. They are malignant growths. They are toxic. Cut them out. We pray that they return to the faith, but not until it is faith they truly desire. If they are sitting there hoping to have their ears tickled and their preconceived notions confirmed, it is the duty of any pastor or priest to disappoint them and offend them. There is no other way to tell the truth. I think he makes a great point. I think so much of what he said is so true. And he actually continued on with this conversation. He was on with Glenn Beck, which we play on this station 9 to noon, if you listen on News Radio 102.5. And he was on with him as well, and he continued on with his point because Glenn was asking him about this. And this is obviously my voice of reason of the day. But he makes great points, especially with what we're dealing with in the culture today. So he was asked by Glenn Beck about this. Go ahead and play the first cut for me from Matt Walsh.
What is the future of Christianity?
I don't think it has much of a future in this culture. If this is what we get, this is what strikes me when I go to church, and I know that, and I wrote that, and there were plenty of Christians who said, "Well, my pastor's great. I don't know what you're talking about," and that's fine. If you have a great pastor, great church, then good for you. You should be very happy for that and grateful. But to deny that this is a problem is absurd. We know that the faith is decaying in this culture. It's very clear. And you look at any indicator, starting with church attendance, it's lower than it's ever been. There's more atheists in this country than there's ever been. You just go right down the line. And it strikes me that, at least from my experience and from talking to people, that the main problem isn't that people are going to church and they're hearing heresy and blasphemy. Well, they're hearing that too, so that's a problem. But even more than that, it's not that. It's just this nothingness. It's just this. It's like you're going to church and the person talking to you doesn't understand, doesn't realize what century they're living in.
And his main point is this: that the culture is killing. As Christians out there, we feel so beaten down by the pop culture today, constantly. And then we go into church and we need a powerful message. The troops need to be encouraged. And yet we're getting this vapid nothingness. Is that what's good for the future? He continues on here in the next point.
You're not giving them anything that they need. There's no reason for you to exist unless you tell them the things that might make them leave. And I think that if we get to a point, it would be great in this country. Separate the wheat from the chaff. Let's figure out where we actually stand as Christians. So if every church operated this way and they got up and they told the unvarnished truth, and you had a church of 100 people and 98 of them get up in the middle of the homily or the sermon and march out, and you leave 2 there, well then great, because those are the 2. Those are the actual 2 Christians. Let's start there. Now we know how many actual Christians we have in this church, 2. Let's start with them. Let's build them up, give them what they need. And then maybe they can go out, because this is the whole point. They're supposed to go out into the mission field and go win back the other 98. But when you're not, so it's really the 2. It's the 2 that you need to kind of cater to. You need to give them what they need, because here's the problem: if you lose those 2, but you keep the 98, then you're done. You're not really a church anymore. You're just like a
They're leaves that will blow away in the fall wind.
So he makes a great point there. And this is actually a point made in the Bible. You read the book of Revelation, and he is blasting people, the lukewarm Christians out there. And this happens all through. Jesus warned about this constantly. In the parable of the sower, he talked about those who had the seeds but were choked out by the weeds and the thorns. He talked about that in separating the wheat from the chaff. It's all throughout the Bible. So I want to expand on this point a little bit more, but this is something we need. Now, there are some good preachers out there, and I pointed them out on this show before. But this is something we're going to need from our church leaders, from our Christian leaders, because the culture is going in a totally different direction. So when we are constantly persecuted in the pop culture because of our Christian faith, we can't just go to church and then expect them to say, oh, well, let's take a lesson here from Toy Story about friendship. No, we need some real substance to give us the encouragement we need. And frankly, we need to be offended every now and then. Jesus offended a lot of people. There's no doubt about that. 407-916-5400, text to 23680 if you have any comments on this. I'll have more comments on this as well. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Download the iHeart Radio app and catch the Beyond Reason Radio podcast. the place where we talk faith, culture, and politics. Beyond Reason Radio continues.
So, let me just read a little bit of what a sermon should sound like from our preachers, even today. This is from Charles Spurgeon, who preached in the 1860s. He was an English preacher, Baptist. And, this is just bold preaching you don't get enough of today. We've been talking about Matt Walsh's piece in The Blaze when he says, "Dear churches, you're killing yourselves, and this is how." And he talks about how too many of these churches, because the culture out there, which we talk about all the time, it's Beyond Reason Radio. We talk faith, culture, and politics. We talk about the culture, and the culture is definitely going away from Christian values. And yet we go to our church and we need encouragement. We need to hear the hard truth there, and yet we're not hearing it there either. So, just read. Let me read a little bit from a sermon from Charles Spurgeon from 1860. He says this. He says, "I shall not begin by talking to you about Sinai. I shall not attempt to show you what the law is and what that penalty is which develops upon every man that breaks it, but feeling that you are not under the law but under grace. I shall draw arguments from the grace of God, from his gospel, from the favor which he has shown to you, arguments more powerful than any which he can be fetched from the law, to show you the greatness of your sin and the abomination of any iniquity which you have committed against the Lord your God. I shall take Ezekiel's method as my model and proceed to copy it thus. First, let us consider the abomination of your sin, aggravated as it is by the remembrance of what we were when the Lord first looked upon us." And he continues on. I don't want to read the whole thing. But, just imagine that. You have so many preachers, and frankly, so many people in general in our lives who would never even want to approach any of that because they're so afraid of offending. Well, as a preacher, we don't want to offend you. I'm a talk radio host. I don't want to offend you. I just be nice to everyone and say exactly what you want to hear. No, we need to be offended sometimes. That's what Matt Walsh said in his piece, and I agree with that. And it's going to be up to the church to help Christians get through. And if you're doing this vapid nothingness, people are just going to leave. Why bother? Why would they stay? They'll just go in the culture and do what the culture does, and they won't get the real faith encouragement they need. A great example of this in my own life, and I remember it really frustrating me at the time. This was a few years ago. And I was looking for a church at the time, and I went to a church here locally, and the pastor it was near Christmas time, and he did a sermon on the Christmas Carol. Okay, there's actually a really great message in the Christmas Carol, but he talked about what's the guy's name? Jacob Marley. Mm-hmm. And he was the ghost of Christmas Past. Mm-hmm. And no, he wasn't the ghost of Christmas Past. He was before that. But he had all the chains on him. Now, why did he have all the chains on him? Because of all the bad things he did in his life. All of those things added up and he did in his life, and he had the chains on him from that. And he was warning Ebenezer Scrooge in the play, in the thing, don't do that. Change your life or you'll end up like me after you die. Okay? So this pastor does a message, and his message is this. We all have these things in our life that make us feel bad, these chains that make us feel bad. And we have to get through that, because I don't want you to feel bad during Christmas time. So I don't want people to be upset or depressed during Christmas time. They should feel happy. So we have to get rid of those chains in our lives of things that make us feel bad in our lives, so we're not upset during Christmas time. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, what in the world are you talking about? For one, that's not the message of the Christmas Carol. But two, you had a great opportunity to preach the gospel there. It's because the gospel is about how we're saved, how we have those chains because we're sinners. And the gospel says, you're a sinner. You are condemned because of those chains. You are a slave to your sin, but through the power of Christ, through faith in Christ, you will be set free from those sins because Jesus took that punishment for you. Because of that, he can forgive you, and it's up to you to repent. And through your faith and forgiveness and grace, you were set free from those sins. That would have been a powerful message using the Christmas Carol. The Christmas Carol, you could have greatly used a Christmas Carol and say, this is a great message of how we are all have these chains because we are all sinners and we all do these bad points in life, but only Jesus Christ can set you free from those sins. Mm-hmm. That would have been a great message, but no, that's not what I heard there. What I heard there is, well, we don't want you to feel bad, so we have to get rid of these things so you feel bad. No, you should feel bad because you are a sinner and condemned, and you need a Savior. That is the message we should hear. That was an example in my own life. And this happens over and over and over again. So I would encourage any pastors out there listening, and luckily I know some good pastors, my pastor as well, who doesn't do this. And there are good pastors out there. I pointed everyone on the show to John MacArthur. He definitely doesn't play this vapid game of dealing with the culture. He's not afraid to offend people. So I would check him out as well. But I thought it was a great piece by Matt Walsh. I would check it out on theblaze.com. Definitely a voice for my generation. He's a millennial as well. Definitely a voice for my generation out there. A good Christian voice for my generation out there. Okay, I know a lot of you want us to get into politics. So we will get into politics in the next segment and talk about what Trump is doing, making deals with the Democrats. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you like Beyond Reason Radio, well, make sure to show it by liking the Facebook page at facebook.com/Beyond Reason Radio. Safe space for conservative thought, not for political correctness. Yaffee is back right now.
Yes, welcome back to the show. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. Make sure to send me a friend request on Facebook if you're listening. Search Michael Yaffee. I will accept it. Or you can like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page. We're on Facebook Live there as well. If you missed any of the show and you need to listen to all 2 hours of every show, you need to. It's a requirement. You can go to listen to the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. You can download the Beyond Reason Radio app as well. It's on Spreaker. It's on iTunes. It's on all the places. So let's take a call here real quick on what we were talking about churches. Let's go to Roger in Orlando. Roger, how are you?
Hey, doing great. Very blessed. Very blessed coming through this storm.
Yeah, I agree.
I was surfing channels looking for something. I found you, and such a breath of fresh air. You were talking about the lukewarm sermons and pastors.
Yep.
And Christianity and Christian. That's something that I believe the Holy Spirit showed me a couple of years ago. We'll meet to chew on it, maybe for the listeners. And the pronunciation, you get offended with the lukewarm sermon stuff. I do get offended with the pronunciation. There is an H in there because Christian is a compound word with ions at the
Well, you're basically saying, I mean, that's kind of an interesting point, I guess, that we should call it Christian instead of Christian. I mean, I get what you're saying. I mean, that's more of an English thing. I think people know what we mean by when we say Christian or Christian. But what do you think about the topic, though? What do you think about these pastors and their lukewarm sermons out there?
Oh yeah, I think you're right on there. People won't probably understand, but we've just always heard it pronounced without the H in there, because if you let me finish for a second, ions is a suffix which means pertaining to, followers of, related to, the noun which it is attached to, which is Christ with an H. Why are we dropping that H out? Let's call ourselves Christians. Say what we are. I'm not a Christ. I don't know what a Christ is. I'm a Christian.
Okay, Roger. All right, Roger. I appreciate your point. I mean, I think of all the big things that we could be talking about in terms of the future of Christianity. Calling it Christian versus Christian is like really low on the list. I mean, in my opinion, that's more of an English language debate than anything else. That's just my opinion. But I appreciate your call. All right, I wanted to get into a little bit of Donald Trump. So what's going on with him? What's happening here? Is he going to make deals with the Democrats now? I mean, I just want to say, are you all expecting me to be surprised by this? I'm not necessarily surprised by this because Trump is, I mean, for one, he came in saying he was the deal maker. So he's going to go in and make deals. I warned everyone that he's been a moderate Democrat most of his life. So there are going to be times he's going to work with Democrats. But I actually don't think that's the biggest issue here in terms of him making deals with Democrats because, frankly, I don't know what the deal is yet. Nobody knows what the deal is yet. We hear that there's something to kind of put DACA in place, and Trump's been kind of defending it. But I have an audio here. If you can pull up the audio, Tom Benson, from Chris Wallace. He was on Fox earlier, and he was asked about this. And I think he really actually brought up the best point in all of this in terms of what Trump is doing with Democrats right now, talking to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and what this all means. And really, I think he was right on what the biggest problem is with all of this. Here it is.
I don't think it looks good. I told you the presidents are judged two ways, policy and governance. Governance, you give them a good mark. Policy, maybe not so much. This has been as clear as mud since last night. First, the administration came out with a statement that basically said it was just a meeting to discuss things. Then Chuck and Nancy came out with a statement saying, no, they basically had a deal. DACA would be enshrined in law, and yes, there would be tougher enforcement, but no border wall. Then Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the president's spokeswoman, said, no, there really hasn't been a deal. Then the president undercut that this morning when, as he left the White House, he said, well, the deal comes later. And then down in Florida, he said, no, there can be no deal until we get funding for the wall. So maybe you understand what's going on, Melissa, but I got to tell you, I don't. And an awful lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill don't know whether he made a deal to continue DACA, to make it law with or without an agreement on the wall, whether it's part of that or whether it has to come first.
See, that's kind of the issue here. We don't really know what happened yet. So Trump tweeted out today that, oh, well, there isn't actually a deal. And then he kind of tweeted out, oh, well, there is. We're already starting on the wall we're rebuilding the fences and, renovating some of the security. It's not quite the same as a wall, but okay, fine. That's good. And then he put something out that's the usual Democrat line of, do you really expect me to kick all these people out of the country? Well, I don't know if I expected you. I'm not necessarily too surprised by this, but the old you expected you. The old you said you were going to. That's the point. When you were running, you said that's what you were going to do. So if you have the old Trump versus the today Trump, then yes, that Trump probably did expect you to do that. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I just don't think this is as big of an issue to him. I've never thought that DACA is a huge issue to him. His big issue is trade and jobs. That is what Trump's going to focus on. All this other stuff, he just wants to get something done. In fact, there's a poll out by Rasmussen today that says 66% of likely U.S. voters say it is good for the country if Trump works with congressional Democrats to advance his agenda. Just 13% think that bipartisan cooperation is bad for the country, while 21% are undecided. So there are a lot of diehard Trump supporters bashing him today, a lot of in the media. And there's only two things I've noticed that they've really bashed him on, these diehard Trump supporters. That was the Jeff Sessions thing and this, because it's two big issues to them. Both of them really have to do with the immigration, Jeff Sessions as well. Steve King said, if AP is correct, Trump base is blown up, destroyed, irreparable, and disillusioned beyond repair. No promise is credible. Here's the thing. I don't know if that's true. Want to know why? Because I think a lot of people that voted for Trump, they just want to get something done. And it's something I've talked about forever, how so many American people, they just get something done. Congress, get something done. Who cares? If you're working with Democrats, fine. Let's just get something done. And it's one of those things I'm like, okay, it kind of depends what we're going to get done. But I think that that's what this poll is with Rasmussen, saying a lot of people support what he's doing because they just want something to get done. They don't care as long as it gets done. They're sick of the gridlock. But Ann Coulter's not happy, obviously. She loved Trump. She had a wrote book on Trump. In Trump We Trust. She said at this point, who doesn't want Trump impeached? So now she wants Trump impeached over this.
She's throwing what Rush would call a drive-by bomb.
I don't know. You say that, but she has been pretty consistent on bashing Trump lately on this. On because this is her issue. This is her issue.
She's saying, I'm Ann Coulter. I'm out here. Listen to me. That's what she's saying. A lot of hot air.
You're not a fan of her, are you?
No, I'm not. No.
I would think maybe you would appreciate that she was willing to stick to her guns on this and not just follow Trump wherever he goes. I don't know. Laura Ingraham also. Is she another one that throws out hot air? Tom Benson, Laura Ingraham?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Well, she said this. When does American working class without real wage increase in 15 years and who sends their kids to overcrowded public schools get amnesty? Only deal that might make sense for DACA is RAISE Act plus E-Verify plus Wall. Here's the thing, and I can't. Part of me can't believe. I mean, I'm not too surprised, but it's just kind of funny that we now have President Trump, Mr. Build the Wall. We're going to deport the illegals. Now wants amnesty. But here's the thing: I don't think the American people would be upset at amnesty if they built the wall first.
He's delivering a message to the Republicans. The message is, get off your butt. Let's get our agenda going. And if the Republicans aren't going to do it, and they haven't done it to date, he'll go somewhere else. And that's exactly what he's doing.
Well, yeah, but what if the Democrats don't have the same idea of what that agenda is?
We'll find out.
Well, we're going to find out, yeah. You think the Democrats are going to allow him to build the wall? Do you think they're going to compromise on that with this?
Who knows?
I know. No, they're not going to do it. Come on. But the point I do want to make, though, is if we built the wall first and we had border security first, then I don't think the American people would be as upset if we passed some type of amnesty for a lot of these illegals. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, we don't trust them because they always make it you notice it's always comprehensive immigration form. So they add the wall and the same thing as amnesty, but the amnesty happens immediately, but the wall never happens.
Sounds like comprehensive gun control.
Oh, God. I don't even want to know what that is. Don't even give them any ideas. Sean Hannity also tweeted, he said, if POTUS doesn't keep that promise and goes for amnesty, it will be the political equivalent of read my lips, no new taxes. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm really not. If he can get some funding for the wall, maybe this is a decent deal. But I think the American people, kind of like what you said, Tom Benson, just want something to get done. They're upset that the Republicans couldn't repeal Obamacare. They're upset that the Republicans can't seem to get anything done. So Trump's going to the Democrats, and it's probably not going to get what we want from them either. But they're just saying, hey, at least he's getting something done. Is what I think is what's going to come out of all of this.
If you can't hit a home run, you hit a triple.
If you can't hit a home run, you hit a triple.
Yeah, in other words, you advance your agenda and get as much as you can from somebody.
Whatever. I think he's going to hit a foul ball with the Democrats.
Well,
that's my opinion.
Somebody I heard today said Trump was elected because his promise was make America great again. It wasn't because his promise was make Republicans great again.
Well, that's true. Obviously, he's not some kind of big Republican guy. But here, let me ask you this, okay? So he does a deal for amnesty for these dreamers. Oh, gotta love the term dreamer. We talked about that before. So he does that. What should we get in return?
Well, first of all, any deal that is done still has to be approved by both sides of Congress. And they're controlled by the Republicans.
Well, the Republicans want the Republicans want this. The Republicans love DACA. They act. Some of them act like they don't, but they love this.
So then what's the problem? Then why won't the Republicans work and get it done? You know, they've had, a week, 10 days now since DACA controversy blew up, and you've heard nothing from them about what they're going to do.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Well, I guess the Republican Party is pretty split on it, Trump base. But no, seriously, you didn't answer my question, Tom.
What was your question?
What should we get?
I'm a politician.
What should we get in return?
Pivot and get something else. What do you mean by we? Who's we? Republicans?
Well, if we
or
Republicans, conservatives, whatever, Trump's base doesn't like that he's doing amnesty.
If they want DACA, we should get, or Trump should get support for increased security. If it is a wall, still get increased security along the border with Mexico.
All right. We'll see what happens. All right, I will end the show with things that made Yaffee laughy. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Subscribe to the Beyond Reason podcast today on your Stitcher app and hear the voice of reason anytime. Your voice of truth in a world of fake news. Beyond Reason Radio continues right now.
Well, see, I already got people making my point that a lot of Trump's base is not going to be too upset at him doing this, even though some of his ardent supporters in the media are upset at him doing this. I have Tom Benson, who's not too upset at him doing this, and then I have a texter who texted in and says, "From one deplorable to another, I'm sticking with POTUS where he leads. I continue to follow." So he's going to continue to follow Trump, even if Trump's making deals and having amnesty for the Dreamers and maybe doesn't have a wall but has some fencing. So I don't know. I just find that very interesting that they want him to get something done. They're going to follow him. So I just find that fascinating. All right, it is that time of the show for things that make Yaffee laughy. All right, so this story, I mean, I don't know if it should make me laugh, but it does.
You don't know whether to cry or laugh? Is that it?
No, it's not one of those. It's just the people in this story are not laughing, but it makes me laugh, okay?
Okay.
Here's the headline. I'm sure you probably heard about this already. There's a clown rally at New York City Theater. Oh, look at that. That's interesting. So it turns out that one of the clown rallies that was at a New York City Theater was a publicity stunt to promote it, one of the organizers said. But apparently there are a bunch of clowns out there. What?
A bunch of clowns. You're making me laugh.
Apparently, man, this is interesting that it ended up being fake. But a man claiming to be a professional clown who planned a rally outside New York City movie theater, complaining his business suffered because of marketing around the horror clown movie It, admitted Thursday the protest was a sham.
Uh-huh.
A publicity stunt designed to promote the very movie he said cost him cash. This is a new update. I don't think this was
good old-fashioned Hollywood.
What he said. That's very interesting.
Promotional effort, huh?
Yeah, because originally it was going viral.
Yeah, because they were hurting the image of clowns, bona fide clowns who entertain at parties and circuses. Are there circuses left anymore? But visit sick kids in the hospital, that kind of stuff.
Wow, that's I think that must have just been updated because I was reading it earlier today, and they were saying that clowns, that many clowns were upset that the movie It was interrupting their business because kids were scared, which kids have always been scared, and they were going to have a massive rally in protest to the movie It. But now it's coming out that that was fake. Very interesting. Okay, it gives me a little hope for society then, because I was going to say that if clowns are upset I mean, I was just in disbelief that we were at a point in 2017 that clowns were now a persecuted minority. So we would have clowns who are now protesting because they feel like they're a persecuted minority in this country because of a movie. Mm-hmm. But it turns out it was actually fake. That's actually genius marketing. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
That is genius marketing. He said he, along with a group of other local clowns, plan to rally outside Union Square Regal Cinema Thursday evening. Our hope is to raise enough awareness so when people think of clowns, they won't think of scary murderers, but people who dedicate their lives to bringing joy. But they found out later, he said, I'm not the only clown who has been upset about this. The movie hit. You just love the clown word. I just think it's... I'm just picturing a bunch of very sad clowns because the movie It has just ruined their business. But it turns out it was a sham. That is very interesting. That's very interesting. All right, so maybe clowns are not taking it as hard as they thought. I don't know. I haven't seen the movie yet. I'll probably go see it. We'll see. All right, I appreciate y'all listening to the show today. Make sure to check out the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. And make sure to have a good weekend. Hopefully you'll get some rest and it won't be as crazy as last weekend, obviously, when we had a giant hurricane over the state. But I will be back next week with more faith, culture, and politics. Catch you guys then.
That nothing comes from